In the dead of a Hokkaido winter, a boy named Naoki Yoshida crossed the street to a friend's house because the kid who lived there had figured out a new way to play. There was a Famicom hooked up to the television, running a game called Mario Bros. And what got Yoshida, before anything else, was the controller. A television had always been a thing you sat and looked at. Now, with that controller in his hands, he could reach into the screen and make the little man move. What the friend had figured out was a trick, and kind of a mean one. In Mario Bros, you could flip an enemy onto its back, and if you hit it again, you stood it right back up. The friend used that to revive every enemy the instant Yoshida cleared it, so the boy just kept losing round after round. He went home hating the kid, and at the same time, he wanted to do the same thing to someone else with a game of his own. That was a strange ambition for a kid who could barely afford to play. There wasn't much money at home in Hakodate, the port town where he grew up, and most games cost more than he had. 50 yen in an arcade bought a set amount of play, and he knew exactly how much. He would pour hundreds of hours into a single game, wringing it dry before it was done with him, and when his own coins ran out, he would stand behind the players who were better than him and study how they did it for free. Then years later came Dragon Quest. It hit him harder than any book or film ever had, and this time, what stuck more than anything else was the story. A whole world you could walk through, collecting quests that were all yours alone to carry. Mario was what made him want to make games, and now, Dragon Quest made him want to build worlds of his own and write the stories that lived inside them. By his teens, the plan was set. He was going to make games, no more questions about it. But in the meantime, he was getting frighteningly good at playing them, mailing his high scores off to the arcade magazines and watching them turn up in the national rankings. Afterburner 2, the Sega flight game everyone fed their coins to, was second in the entire country. Well, at least according to him. He had also talked his way into running the game corner of a busy toy shop. A part-timer the store trusted with the actual buying, and on the slow afternoons, he read Famitsu cover to cover. When it came time to actually break in, the studio he dreamed of was Chunsoft, the house that had made Dragon Quest itself. But the money wasn't there, so Chunsoft was out. The other way in was through a game design school run by Hudson Soft, with an internship attached that would get him working and earning sooner. He took the Hudson one, so his mother could stop worrying about money a little earlier, and that settled it. So he packed up, left the North, and in 1993, he went to find out if he could actually make them. Turned out, he could. He got there by taking the work nobody else wanted, the broken projects, the ones with the deadline already bearing down, putting his hand up for them while the senior people looked the other way. Young as he was, they started handing him real work, and mostly, that meant writing. Scenarios for a fantasy series called Far East of Eden, then a Bomberman game, where he took the little round guy whose whole purpose is blowing things up and built a real hero around him. He had also taught himself to read code, enough to stand in a room full of programmers and hold his own in their language. That was the day job. What actually had hold of him ran at night, online, in other people's worlds. It started when someone older at the office pointed him toward a game called Ultima Online. He logged in, and there were 3,000 people in there all at once, sharing one world, and they lived it. You could track a deer through the woods, kill it, tan the hide, stitch the leather into a vest, sell the vest to somebody who wanted one, and put the money toward a house of your own. So Yoshida, being Yoshida, ran two characters simultaneously. One was a gentleman, a lord, gracious to every stranger he met. The other was a murderer, a player killer who existed for no reason on earth except to find someone having a good night and ruin it. He played them both, all the way, the saint and the killer, at once. One game was never going to be enough. When EverQuest came out, you almost couldn't get a copy in Japan, so on his trips down to Tokyo for work, he would comb Akihabara, shop to shop, counter to counter, asking the same thing at every till. You got EverQuest? You got EverQuest? Like a zombie, until somebody finally said yes. But like many other hobbies in Japan at the time, none of that paid the bills. The one that actually does was Bomberman. He did pour his heart and soul into that one too. And one day, a manager above him looked at what he did for a living and called it kid stuff. To Yoshida, that got it exactly backward. A game could reach anyone, a child, a grown adult, or somebody's grandfather, and the fun in it never came stamped with an age. It was the reason he had poured his nights into those worlds in the first place. And here was a man who looked at all of that and saw children's games, and who happened to outrank him. The insult he could have lived with. A boss who genuinely believed it, he could not. So the moment the words were out of the manager's mouth, he told him he was done. He had wanted to be at Hudson since he was a kid, back when it was one of the biggest names in the business. Now, he walked out anyway. After that, with the experience now behind him, he didn't have to look far for somewhere to land. The people he had come up with at Hudson had already gone off to start a studio of their own, up in Sapporo, called Rocket. They wanted him, so he went. And at Rocket, he finally got what he had been working toward the whole way along, a world of his own to build. It was an online action RPG for Windows. The dungeons remade themselves every time you went down, so the place was never the same way twice. New ground unfolding under your feet every single time. He drew the whole thing up, every system, every rule of how it ran, and he poured himself into it, the way you only can when the thing is finally yours. A producer named Yosuke Saito, who loved the same games he did, came on to make it real. Enix, a Japanese multimedia publisher, agreed to put up the money. His name was on it, and after everything, maybe it was going to be his to keep. But in the end, like other beautiful things, this didn't last. In 2003, Square and Enix merged to form Square Enix. The new management looked at his game and wanted it to be something else. It had to run on the PlayStation 2 now, not just the PC, and tie into their own online service. So the team had to rebuild it to fit. But then the demands shifted again, and they rebuilt it a second time. Then it was shelved for whatever reasons no one cares enough to name. The first game he ever designed died in a meeting he wasn't in over a merger he had nothing to do with. Saito, though, wasn't ready to let it go. There was a way to come back to the whole thing, he told Yoshida. He called it taking their revenge, and Yoshida said yes. The revenge Saito had in mind ran through Square Enix itself. He was an executive there now, and he had a new project he wanted Yoshida on, a new Dragon Quest. Saying yes meant Tokyo and leaving Rocket, the studio his old Hudson friends had built to go make a world for the same company that had just killed his last one. Before he left, his old boss sat him down, the man who had brought him into Rocket and had known Yoshida for a long time now. He told him it would be tough, that he would be sorry to see him go, but that he should take the job anyway. Then he asked for two things in return. Climb all the way to the top of Square Enix and become an executive. Whatever happened up there, send some work back our way. Yoshida promised him both and went on to the next chapter of his life. The Dragon Quest they put him on was going somewhere the series never had, online, for the first time. A game you logged into and lived in, a world that kept running whether you were there or not. He came on as the fourth person on the team, riding it shoulder to shoulder with Yuji Horii, the man who created it. And he was good at it. Within a couple of years, the game's director handed him the reins, and Yoshida became the acting director of the whole thing. The core systems were built under him, and he ran the project for the next year and a half. It was the deepest he had ever been inside a living world. But again, he didn't get to keep this one either. Square Enix had a rule, one director to a project. Yoshida had only ever been acting, covering for Fujisawa, the real director, while he was away. When he came back to it full time, there was only room for one. So they moved Yoshida out. He was away on a business trip when it happened, and came back to find the chair filled and his name removed from the project. After that, no one was quite sure what to do with him, or with the two others cast out beside him. Hiroshi Takai, who had just directed his first game, and Hiroshi Minagawa, who had spent a career making other people's games beautiful. The company had a name for the three of them anyway, Stray Dogs. In 2009, the studio sent them off together to study how the big Western studios built their games. What they gave Yoshida to build was a long shot, an experimental game that would end up cancelled. He spent it teaching the younger developers under him how to run a game of their own one day, even though he didn't even have one himself. The next thing they handed him was an arcade game about cars for parents and kids to play together. And around the same time, in another corner of the company, things were on fire. In the autumn of 2010, Square Enix launched the 14th Final Fantasy, a brand new online world, and it came out as the worst reviewed game the series had ever put its name on. And Yoshida, he was off with his toy cars while the company's flagship went down. It had taken 5 years and a room full of people to build the thing that burned. Go back to the start of it, to the room, the people in it, the fact that every one of them came to work certain they were going to win, which given what they were walking into was close to insane. In November 2004, an American studio called Blizzard released World of Warcraft, and it gave the whole industry a heart attack, becoming the most popular world anyone had ever built. It was a place where more than 12 million people paid to live, month after month, year after year. A world that never closed its doors. The whole business looked at that and saw a gold rush. That dream, a revenue stream that never ran dry, hit the publishing world hard. So like every gold rush before it, the building began. Every publisher with the cash to try went chasing a subscription of its own. The press had the headline ready before any of them even shipped. The WoW killers, they would call those. Some of them were good games, but that didn't matter much. They all failed, just like every WoW killer before them, and every one that would come after. Tabula Rasa came and went inside a year and a half. Warhammer Online drew an enormous crowd on launch day, then spent the next year watching it file back out the door. A lucky few survived by tearing up the subscription model and going free. Most just died, because the people who had already disappeared into World of Warcraft were not about to start paying a second monthly bill to live somewhere else. There was only ever room for one. WoW Killer, the press kept calling them, and one after another, the name turned into a headstone instead. If anything was ever going to kill World of Warcraft, it was only ever going to be World of Warcraft itself. Except one company had already pulled this off once, and they were the ones in the room. Years before WoW existed, Square had already built an online Final Fantasy of its own, Final Fantasy XI. Back then, the man who had created the whole series, Hironobu Sakaguchi, was still in the building, and it had worked. While the rest of the series made its money in one big wave of sales, then went quiet afterward. Final Fantasy XI made it slowly, off a smaller crowd who paid every month and stayed for years. Add all those months up, and that unglamorous online game had out-earned every Final Fantasy before it, even the blockbusters. They had earned it the honest way. To build 11, the team went out and bought up the Western MMOs. Ultima Online, EverQuest, all of them, lined up and played through to see how it all worked. Sakaguchi himself got so deep into EverQuest that he filled pages with notes from his own nights playing it, and sent them in to talk the rest of the team into going online at all. They were a company that did its homework. When the gold rush came, everyone else was shoving chips onto a table they had never sat at. Square had already sat at it before. To them, a second online Final Fantasy was a homecoming more than anything else. Around 2005, the project got greenlit. Another online Final Fantasy, bigger than 11, was built on everything 11 had gotten right. They had, after all, been right before. So they built it the same way they had built the first one. A few hundred of them went down into the work of actually making it, the ones who would turn out to be the first to feel it come apart in their hands. One of them was a man named Koji Fox. He was American, and he had gotten to that room by just about the least likely road there is. As a kid, he loved Japanese games so much that he sat down and learned the whole language, just so he could play them the way they were meant to be played. That eventually took him to Japan, where he turned out to be tall enough that somebody took one look at him and made him the local basketball coach. He taught English in the daytime. At night, he went home and vanished into Final Fantasy XI. Then one day, he answered an ad for a translator at Square Enix, and that was that. Now, he ran the English localization team. His job was to rebuild the entire game in another language, word by word, which made him one of the first people alive to see the new Final Fantasy whole, every system, every piece. The first thing about these people was how good they were, and how sure of it. They made the best looking games in the business. They had earned that confidence, every inch of it. Every team was in love with its own corner of the thing, the artists most of all. Someone had built what people in that building would tell you, with total sincerity, the most beautiful barrel ever put in a video game. They had built that barrel the way they built everything, by hand, one at a time, like swordsmiths making katanas, while the rest of the industry had moved on to turning them out by the thousand. A single barrel had as many polygons packed into it as a whole human character. So did the flower pots. It got so heavy with all that handmade detail that once players actually showed up, the screen could only hold about 20 players at a time. Koji kept piecing the game together, and underneath all the beauty, the same problem kept surfacing. They had built it on the wrong engine. It had been made years earlier for an ordinary Final Fantasy, the single-player kind, where one hero walks through a story and the story ends. Nobody ever built it to run a world. And now, here they were, asking it to be one. Open day and night, thousands of strangers moving through it at once. Obviously, it buckled. There was never any way it wasn't going to. The people who might have fixed it weren't around either. The company was building that engine across every project at once, which had pulled its best programmers off everything else, including this game. So the whole thing came together slow and thin and half finished. Enormous, gorgeous, and mostly hollow. The simplest problem of all sat under even that, the one no patch was ever going to touch. It just wasn't any fun to play. Koji could feel exactly where that came from because he had come up through Final Fantasy XI. He had watched it win the slow, unfashionable way on nothing but patience. Now, the same room was building the new game exactly the way they had built the old one. Sure, it would work because it always had. He could see all of it coming. The launch date was already set. It was coming whether the game was ready or not. On the 13th of June 2010, Square Enix announced September 13th, a little over 3 months away as the release date. Now it was a promise to the shareholders, the retailers, the hundreds of thousands who had been waiting 5 years. So they ran at it. For the last 3 months, the team all but lived at the office. They put everything they had into hitting that date, working the hours people work when the deadline is fixed and the game is not. A lot of them did it with the doubt already in the air. The one thing left was the open beta, the game's last real chance to put it in front of a crowd and catch the worst before anyone paid. It was set for the 31st of August, but got pulled on the same day for critical bugs. Then, it didn't actually start until the 2nd of September. The date didn't move an inch to wait for it. The beta just ran its last few weeks straight into release, the bugs still crawling all over it in plain view of anyone who logged in. The same bug kept popping up in meetings and hallways. It still wasn't fixed. By the end, nobody was sure anymore that it ever could be. It was one of Koji's own localizers who finally couldn't carry it, so he sat down and wrote it all out, everything the room had been too stubborn to move on from. Then he sent it, straight past the chain of command, past even his own team, who had no idea he was doing it. It reached everyone, at once, the whole development team, hundreds of people, and it changed nothing at all. By then, it wasn't only one email. The people making the game had started saying the same thing through the proper channels too, carefully on the record. The company heard them, and went anyway. The reasoning was hard to argue with, because it had already come true once. Final Fantasy XI had launched rough as well, years back, a real mess. They had patched it, and turned it into the game that ended up paying for everything. So they would just do it again this time. Yet this time, things were different. On the 30th of September 2010, Final Fantasy XIV went out into the world. Exactly as promised, exactly on schedule, and almost entirely unfixed. The people who had bought it took it home and sat down to play. There were a lot of them. Something like 600,000 copies went out the door in that first stretch, a real turnout for a Final Fantasy. After 5 years, the crowd they had built the whole world to hold had finally arrived. But the world they walked into was empty. You could run across open country in there for 20 minutes for nothing. The cities never filled. All those people had shown up, and out in the fields, you were somehow always alone, and the game could barely keep up with you. You would go to open your bag and wait. Try to stand up and wait again. 2 seconds, maybe 5, every goddamn single time, while the server somewhere far off decided whether to let it happen or not. Push through all that, and the game still had one more thing for you. It was set up so that the more you played, the less it gave you. A system inside it counted your hours, and past a certain point, a whole afternoon could earn you almost nothing on a game you were paying for by the month. So as fast as they had come, they left. In a matter of weeks, it thinned out. The world built to hold a crowd went quiet and stayed that way. By then, the talk had stopped being about the game at all and climbed up to the name on the box. Out in the world, people were writing that Final Fantasy itself was finished, the whole series, more than 20 years of it, dragged under by this one single game. The ones still hoping for it just looked pathetic for bothering. Inside the building, the same fear ran quieter and deeper. Maybe they couldn't keep doing this at all. The company couldn't even bring itself to charge for it. The free month stretched to 2. Down in localization, Koji's team stopped translating a game. For months, what they translated was apologies. The patch notes, the notices, the official word were all some version of "we're sorry, we know, we're working on it." Koji read what people were saying about the thing he had given years of his life to. He wanted to defend it. These were the best people he had ever worked with. Friends of his, going back to his Final Fantasy XI days. People who had just poured the last of themselves into it. He wanted to grab the strangers who were tearing it apart and tell them they didn't understand, that they hadn't seen what he had seen. But he couldn't, because they did understand. They were right. And Koji knew that if he had been on the other side of it, just some guy who had saved up and bought the thing and taken it home, he would have said every word they were saying.